It's often called as the greatest financial crisis in the history of the United States because it lasted 10 years and crashed the entire economy. The American leadership tried everything to save the economy, but nothing worked out. Every solution proved to be ineffective in the face of such a crisis, and the only thing that could save the economy was the deadliest war in human history. It's July of the year 1914. World War I breaks up and the entire Europe is in conflict. But the war slowly spreads to the rest of the world. Everyone is eager to win, but unfortunately, supplies are limited, especially food. So the Allies turned to the United States for help, since it wasn't directly affected by the war and had the economic power to do that. War by no means is good, but it brought a period of economic prosperity to the United States. The demand for equipment, weapons, wheat was at all-time high, and no one else could fill that gap except the US. If you were a farmer, you could produce as much wheat as you wanted and could sell it easily at a high price. Since countries with troops at the battlefield had to take any measures to win the war. By the end of the war, the US also entered the game, which further increased the demand since soldiers needed equipment and food. It was probably the best time to invest since the economy was booming and everyone was making money. Even though that the war has ended by 1918, the demand for American goods, especially wheat, didn't fall because the entire world was still recovering. When farmers realized that, they began taking huge loans to buy more land and equipment to farm more wheat, which led the real estate prices to grow. That pushed people to buy even more lands, hoping to sell it later for a higher price. The same thing was happening to every other industry. In fact, many companies emerged that only existed on paper but didn't even have the equipment or land because everyone was throwing money into the stock market hoping to make a fortune, which further escalated prices. Would you really stand aside and watch how your neighbors make money while you get nothing? Even foreign countries started investing in the United States hoping to make a buck. I guess you can already see the flaw. Many companies were overpriced since most of these investments were based on speculations. Nonetheless, that didn't stop people from investing. People had faith in the economy. When things are good, you start thinking that it's going to be like that forever. What seems so obvious today wasn't that obvious then. The Europe started recovering. The demand for American goods fell, especially for wheat, since other countries began to grow their wheat as well. In August of 1929, France and Italy were bragging of a magnificent harvest, while the US had millions of bushels of wheat on the shelves that they couldn't sell. This oversupply threatened to drive the prices down. It caused a little panic in the stock market, but nothing really significant. A month later, the wheat prices really decreased from $1.49 per bushel to $1.39 because of the oversupply. It was devastating news. The stock market plummeted. People got frightened and began to sell their stocks to cash out before the stock market declines further. That only made the situation worse, crushing the market even more. That day, October 29th, went down in history as Black Tuesday. However, that was just the beginning. Since wheat prices were falling, farmers couldn't pay back their debt. That created pressure on the banks. The panic has already spread to the entire country, and all what people cared about was cash. So they rushed to the banks for their savings. Fortunately, banks couldn't pay them back because the borrowers weren't able to pay the banks back, so they had to shut down one after another. In just 10 months, 744 banks failed. It didn't matter whether you had a good or a bad business. People lost faith in the market, and all what mattered was to minimize the losses. As a result of that, even good, legit businesses started declaring bankruptcies. The news quickly spread to Europe and caused panic over there, since many European countries have invested heavily in the United States. The panic caused the same thing over there, and soon the entire world was facing a Great Depression. Although this crisis happened almost 100 years ago, financial crises in general are pretty similar, including the dot-com bubble and the 2008 crash. And the next global recession is going to take place in a very similar way. Nobody really knows for sure how and when exactly it's going to start, but we have multiple bubbles that are big enough to burst at any moment, such as student loans, healthcare, and most importantly, the stock market itself. Since the last crisis, S&P 500 has increased dramatically. This growth is definitely unsustainable, and when it crashes, it's going to create a panic that's simply going to make things much worse. You can't really avoid the recession because the world economy is so interconnected and dependent on each other that a crisis in the largest economy in the world will take down the rest of the world with it. But the recession isn't going to be forever. It might last a year, maybe 2, maybe 5, but eventually it will recover. Just a year after the 2008 crash, in 2009, the S&P 500 increased by 26.5%. So don't panic and sell your investments when the media will be shouting all over the place that if you won't sell now, you are going to lose every damn penny you have invested. Of course, some companies won't survive the crisis and go bankrupt, as it happens in every other crisis. But if you are an investor in an index fund, for example, you should be fine. You probably will lose your job because companies will start cutting costs in order to survive. So if you're not vital to their survival, you might be unemployed. So make sure you have some savings on the side. But the smartest investors will start investing heavily because prices will be at their lowest point. And once the economy recovers, they will be much wealthier. And that's another reason why the rich get richer. The topic of the global recession never ends. That's why the media started talking about it even before the last crisis ended. But this video has to. So, thanks for watching, and until next time.